Good to see you, Mayor Wu.
Good to see you both.
Yeah,
this is a huge crowd for Fritz today.
I know.
Standing room only.
Exactly. Well, Mayor, before we get into all the tough stuff around the city, let's start with.
Oh, and I didn't bring food this time.
Oh, brother.
But
she brought us presents. Every time you come,
Well,
we're
let's
going
hear
to
it.
bring presents.
It's more a show and tell, but I
Okay, show
disguise
and
it
tell.
as a present. So it's Lunar New Year season.
Thank
These are
you.
lucky red envelopes, as is a tradition to
thank
give.
you.
Usually
Thank you.
there's money in it, but I don't. This is the last place I want to be giving you an envelope stuffed with cash.
Exactly.
So inside there's an invite to the
Oh.
city's Lunar New Year celebration that's happening this year.
Oh,
Well,
how about
thank you.
that? That's great.
Well,
Thank you
before,
very much.
in light of the fact you do embarrass us every single month, and we, of course, yet again, when you bring food, and we never do, Sally Ting from Needham, who's got a home bakery, brought us some of the most beautiful baked goods I've ever seen. And she said if we wanted to give half of them to the mayor, it'd be fine with
you're
her. So I want you to
regifting.
know
I'll take it.
we are regifting
Absolutely.
some beautiful items from Sally Ting, and they look beautiful, and we thank you,
Thank
and
you,
I'm
Sally.
sure the mayor does
Are they
too.
sugary over there, Jim? I could use a little sugar hit.
Do you really
at
want
this
one? I'll have
juncture.
one delivered to you right
Have
away.
one delivered to
Okay,
me right
fine.
away. Okay, so like I said, before we get to the all the political things and all the stuff you're dealing with as a mayor, you came here, I think, from this morning or maybe just before you got here, from visiting someone who really wanted to meet you.
Oh, Norman.
Yeah, tell us
It's a
about
great
Norman.
story.
Norman is a gem and really part of the bedrock of Boston's community. He lives at the Huntington YMCA and has been there, and they have a small residential community, but he's been there for 6 decades now, 60 years, since he first found a home there in his early 20s. And he's just such a treasure. I learned that and so I had learned about this because they'd done an interview with him right around the holidays when he was moving in. They'd refurbished his apartment and made it modern and new and beautiful. And in that interview, he talked about all the folks he had met and just has specifically called me out for not having visited him before. So I did right and made that right by going to spend a little time with him this morning.
This is at the Y on Huntington Avenue?
Yeah.
Oh, and he's been there for 6 decades.
60 years.
Why?
Yep.
He by choice, has he not? I mean,
Yes,
he
yes.
he likes it there. It's a CVB. Am I right? It's Channel 5, I think, did the original story. Am I right?
WBZ.
Oops, I'm sorry. Channel 4.
It's okay.
WBZ did
That's
the
okay.
story. So I know it's hard for you to answer this question because it requires you to be not humble, which you pretty much are. How excited was he to have you there?
Oh, it was so good. Well, first, I think, okay, I'll just frame it this way. He was sitting in a chair next to the table with the YMCA tablecloth on it, and he had his walker in front of him, and he said he wanted to show me something that was really important. He opened the seat of it, kind of flipped up the seat of his walker, and there was a picture of him with Mayor Menino right there that he kept framed. And so I'm just, I think, a reminder of him from that moment. But it was lovely, and we talked about all of the history and everything that he's experienced as part of this changing institution and this part of the city. And he shared with me his favorite movies, which are all quite scary. Poltergeist, King Kong. It was a little bit much for me.
You know, can we do something? Ordinarily, when we have someone like the mayor with us, we ask a few questions before we read texts and emails and calls. But the first question from the audience here actually relates to a discussion we just had with Jared Bowen about rehearsal space and that sort of thing. So Charlie, a musician, has a question for you. Charlie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure.
So I am a 15-year musician in Boston, and I've been practicing at the Charlestown Rehearsal Studios for 10 of those, and before that I was at the Sound Museum in Allston. It's been in the news a lot recently, and you just covered it. All of these rehearsal studios are under threat, and these are the last 3 left in the entire city. And development in the Seaport eliminated many practice spaces before that. Development in Cambridge has eliminated many, and now we're kind of reaching the end of the road with the Sound Museum closing for at least 2 years, et cetera, and now CRS possibly closing with no replacement. So there are thousands of people like me in the city. Many hundreds of us might soon be without a place to work on what we work on with really no plan in place. So I guess my question is, it's a big issue, but my question is, I've heard medium and long-term ideas about how to support the arts in the city, but are there any kind of short and immediate term things that can help me and the people like me not lose our space and really kind of be able to continue doing what we're doing.
So I want to get to the zoom out in 1 second, but just so I understand and kind of getting a pulse check on how I have been following what's been happening on the ground. You were at the Sound Museum very recently, and have you been part of the program where the tenants there are basically being connected to the space in Dorchester and all set that way, or?
So actually, no. I moved from Alston to Charlestown about 12 years ago.
Got it. Okay. Got it.
and
Okay, that's super helpful. I just want to make sure that actually happened because that. So, as Charlie says, in some ways we are way behind the ball on this issue, and every time that a particular building has come up, there's been an all hands on deck effort to find a solution that works for this particular community and this particular set of artists and creatives. With the Humphrey Street Studio in Upham's Corner, there was a massive effort in city funding and a new plan for those artists to now own that building with a co-op structure and develop affordable housing on site. With the Sound Museum, there are arrangements where ultimately the new development there is going to create a whole new, larger building for the arts. Again, this is several years down the line with the development project, and we've been able to settle an interim solution where the tenants will stay where they need to be for the time being and then transition to a space in Dorchester that some of my colleagues have been very, very helpful with securing.
This is the old Globe building in Dorchester, is it not? 55 Morrissey, is that?
I actually don't think is that.
Okay,
I'll double check
Go
just
ahead.
to,
Sure.
maybe we can
Okay.
make sure we check the location on that one so I'm not totally wrong. I haven't been to the Eagan space yet. But there are two other buildings.
It's right next door to where the Globe was, where we used to actually do radio.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Channel
Go ahead.
56.
Yeah, that's right.
It was there for years too,
Yeah,
right?
go ahead.
But there are two other buildings that we know of right now, each with a kind of different situation that we are rushing to address. And one of them, we feel pretty good about the plan for those artists who are looking to stay and transition into the Sound Garage and other spaces. The other, we're still working on it, but it cannot be this kind of whack-a-mole situation as the spaces dwindle and the stress that puts on individual artists. And so we dedicated a significant portion of our federal recovery funds to the arts. It'll be the biggest investment and infusion, and soon there's going to be a call that goes out to really help direct these funds to some of the organizations that can be the umbrella and home for these spaces. But there's a combination of the real estate market plus supports and just life stability in terms of incomes and housing for artists as people in a community working jobs, and then the city's kind of larger arts and culture landscape and who is included in that. On the first front, on the real estate side, this is why when we've we're shifting how we do development in the city and focusing on planning, really integrating all of the aspects that need to set the terms for how the city will grow and the permissions that will be given out for development to follow that. And that's why on that Planning Advisory Council that's been set up to coordinate the city's activities, for the first time, arts will have a firm seat in that conversation from the beginning.
Charlie, thank you. We appreciate your question. You know, speaking of development, before we get back to calls and texts, one of the centerpieces of your State of the City the other night was talking about the, for lack of a better expression, reorganization of the BPDA. Could you explain, for people who are not involved in the industry, what this reorganization will mean for them in real kinds of ways?
Okay, how much time do we have on the BPDA? So the really brief summary version is that the structure by which we make decisions around how we grow as a city, where we can build buildings, how high, what type, what requirements are surrounding that, has really been governed in large part through a kind of Frankenstein organization that's been built up, mishmash of things over many, many years. The underlying structure still dates back to the urban renewal era. When cities around the country, you can Google this, look it up on Wikipedia, urban renewal, even though those words might sound like we're investing in cities, it has a very particular technical meaning, and it was from an era of the late 50s, 60s into 70s, where the idea was that cities were hotbeds for urban decay and blight, and we needed tools to bring economic investment, commercial development in to kind of have jobs come into cities. Boston is one of the most nationally known cases for how we exercise those urban renewal powers with the West End and clearing of so-called slums, really working class immigrant communities of color, to build large buildings that would help spur investment at the time. Now, we can have a whole separate debate on a different show about whether that was the right approach, whether that was the right way to bring jobs in the city, but no matter what you think about that, we're in a very different moment today. Boston is not a city that is filled with urban blight and so-called decay, and the idea that we would clear people out to create space for jobs or companies or buildings that eventually will provide things for people, we're actually in a different model with our whole economy, especially after the pandemic. It's not so much that people follow jobs, but jobs follow people, right? The reason why Lego is coming to Boston is because this is where the talent is. This is where people want to live with the cultural amenities that we have, the quality of life, the benefits in this ecosystem. And so we want to harness and hold on to all of that. We have a very different set of needs for development. The top line is that we're reorienting the structure from focusing on blight and all that to putting planning and people first and having the big issues, the urgent issues that we do need to prioritize today, resiliency and our climate threats, affordability and how expensive our housing market and everything else is going, and equity, the deep disparities that have been driven by development decisions. These are the focus today, and ultimately as we get the right structures in place, the idea is that we will finally move to update our zoning code. Hasn't been comprehensively updated since 1965. These are the rules that define who can build without having to get a whole set of extraordinary permissions and waivers and so-called variances from the rules. Our zoning code is so out of date that 95% plus of new buildings need a variance from the rules, which means the rules are basically obsolete. And if we were to change that, we would have clear consistency, predictability, and baselines that match our needs today. We also need to just ensure that we are speeding up the processes as they exist. Again, when you layer one thing on top of another, oftentimes you're caught up in hoops and hoops and hoops, and this department weighs in, and that one, and that one. They're all for important reasons, but money and the budgets to go through that process ends up eating up what could be making projects more affordable.
Thank you, Mayor Wu.
Mayor Wu, I have a good email here from Jim in Rockport. He says, "Dear Mayor Wu, I worked at the Boston Rent Board when rent control ended and saw the suffering that ensued and the rents that rose and the elderly and low-income people that were displaced as a result of that. I hope you will stick to your guns and try your best to reinstitute rent control for the poor and suffering tenants of the city of Boston." I know you've filed legislation up at the Beacon Hill. What's going on?
We actually have not yet filed, and it would be with the City Council first. But we have been working with our advisory committee to finalize that proposal and hope to have it soon for the City Council.
Okay, sorry.
The committee had been working over the last year to really study models that are already in place in other parts of the country, Oregon, the state of Oregon, California, other jurisdictions, and to look at the conditions in Boston today. And I want to be clear, sometimes how someone feels about the idea of rent control depends on their understanding of the term. There's wide ranges of what that means, and also what you think the point and the purpose is. Rent control as an individual tool will not solve our housing crisis. It is not a way to generate more housing and increase the number of units that are affordable for residents. It is a way to do a particular thing, which is also really important, and I would argue just as important in this moment in our economy, which is to prevent those residents who are already here in our city from being pushed out by dramatic increases in rent that you cannot plan your life around when they come all of a sudden. And so we're putting together, our plan is a comprehensive integration of a bunch of different tools to boost housing, speed up processes, put money to helping people buy homes, and keep the people who are in our units today stable in their homes.
Can I ask you a couple of questions about that? First of all, we asked the governor at noon if she would reaffirm her position that she expressed to us a few months ago, that she, quote, absolutely supported legislation, even though she wants to see the details, where there was a local option rent control. And even though the Globe said when you brought your proposal out that she was non-committal. She was not non-committal today. She said she has always supported that, and she supports this, subject to details. But I want to talk about the details, though, if I may quickly. One, you, I think, really wisely exempted new development for the first 15 years in your proposal. Yet in the same article, some developer or spokesperson says this is going to inhibit new development. What am I know I have a bias in this, so I will admit it. How can you say that? How can one say that when it's being exempted for the first 15 years of its existence? Is there something I'm missing or no?
I think, again, sometimes people just have a gut reaction to a political term and they haven't read the details of the proposal. And sometimes there's a larger feeling that when capital and funds are so fluid across the country, you have to create a feeling, right, a vibe that this is a welcoming community and we're not antagonistic. I believe that the best way to create those feelings is, in fact, to speed up our processes, be reliable, predictable, change our zoning code and all of that. But as you say, we went to very intense balancing and calculations to ensure that this would not harm the ability to reach our other goals of increasing the supply of housing and affordable housing. So there is that, it is tied to inflation, so it really is by market conditions. It is, there's the proposal that's on the table is a 6% plus CPI inflation cap on the rate of increase. Most years inflation is 1.5% to 2.5%, so this would be something like a 7 or 8% rate of increase that is allowed with an overall cap of 10. So in a year like this, where it's closer to 7% inflation, wildly out of control, it would still be at 10 as the maximum.
Are you open to lowering that number, by the way? I think the number is high. I mean, I know it's inflation's aberrationally high. In your discussion with community leaders, city councilors, are you open to dropping this 10% ceiling?
This goes into the legislative process now with the city council, and this is our proposal that we believe, the advisory committee is going to continue finalizing, but we will end up putting forward something that represents our best belief of what the right balance point is.
So you're open. Is that a fair statement?
Anything that, as a
Okay.
former city councilor,
Okay.
anything that goes before the council is going to go through a real process.
Just one last question, and then I promise we're going to get to the calls. My apologies, but Margery started with rent control. It's a really important topic to a lot of people on both sides of the issues. The governor just said she supports, the concept. She wants to see the details. When you approach a legislator, and historically, since the repeal of rent control in '94, Beacon Hill has not been supportive of rent control, and your representative says politely, why is it your business what the people and leaders of Boston do for the people of Boston? What answer does one get? This is a local option. It wouldn't affect any other community. If your legislation were to become law, Boston could vote to do it or not to do it. What is the answer as to why the state should butt into any of these things?
I think people look to Boston for what is standard setting, and there might be some worry. If you are worried about putting a system like this in place in another part of the city, maybe your thinking is that this would open the door and it's a slippery slope and this and that. I mean, I have arguments against all of that, and I actually feel that the best counter is that let us get the data from us, and then you can make informed decisions. But we have done our own research. We've done reports. We've done a whole year of digging in. We've looked at the comps of different real estate proposals. Most financial institutions, when they give the finances to even help build new rental buildings, the estimates that they have for how much they project as to what revenues could be and all that, they're not projecting more than 5 to 7% rent increases anyway.
Yeah.
And so we're really talking about putting guardrails on what exists today, situations where landlords in certain parts of the city that are kind of more hot for development or there's an opportunity are imposing double-digit rent increases that are unnecessary and very destabilizing for our community.
Let's go to Lois in Mission Hill. You've been very patient. Thank you for calling the show. Hi. Lois.
Well,
Lois.
Lois gave up, I think.
We're going to
Jim.
put Lois on hold for a second. Maybe turn the radio down. Can we go down to Sherry in Roxbury, please? Sherry, you are on Boston Public Radio with the mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu. Hi.
Hi. Hi, Mayor Wu. Thank you for taking
Hello.
the call. So I wanted to say thank you for coming out to speak about the Tyree Nichols. I think that was important. But I think that a lot of fear and anxiety is being created by not releasing the names in the Saeed Faisal case and not having independent investigations with Justin Root and Terrence Coleman. That's all right here in Boston. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, we should explain who Syed Faisal is, the young man who was killed in Boston. Cambridge, rather. The police said he was carrying a knife. He was shot and killed. He was a 20-year-old, I think, student at UMass in Boston, and they're not releasing, as Sherry said, the name of the police officer who shot him, and residents there are very upset about the lack of information they have about the case.
And lack of body cameras, which I was not
Lack
even aware
of
of, even though I
body
live in
cameras.
Cambridge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mayor Wu.
I won't get into way back in the 1800s when Brookline decided not to let Boston annex them, and then we stopped growing and as a municipality, and so we have all these teeny tiny lines that divide us. But this is at least some of the situations you mentioned are not directly within the purview of the city of Boston, and so we're here as allies and those who are looking to set the best possible standards of community policing and involvement and accountability here in the city. We recognize that what we do here really is held up as a national standard, as a place that, not only the first police department in the country, but the first place that really committed to community policing and thinking about doing this in a different way than most others had been. The specific, some of the situations you mentioned are in Boston, and we have been putting in, generating momentum on some of the situations involved. For example, with Terrence Coleman, I've had the chance to speak with some of the family members involved over the years and understand personally that when there is a mental health situation at the root of a public safety call, that is it adds layers of complication that sometimes we are not preparing our law enforcement, our armed first responders to be able to meet the needs fully. And so we actually have launched and are in progress of an alternative response system where EMS and our 911 call takers are, when there is a call that is a nonviolent call specifically with a mental health component to it, there is a response that you can either have a clinician come out, or you can be connected live to a clinician. That there might be some sort of mental health first aid on the phone, or a variety of scenarios. We continue to refine that and work alongside community members to ensure that we are always doing better.
But it's a policy. I know you're not in charge of Cambridge. It's been 27 days since Mr. Faisal was killed. Is there, when you look at Memphis and the speed with which there was disclosure, both of the video, the facts, the firing, the indictment of these 5 cops and subsequently EMTs, and a 6th cop has been suspended. Is there ever any reason for almost a month to not let the public know who is responsible for the shooting and killing of a resident of your community?
Knowing a little bit of kind of the depth of consequences that can go into each step of these kinds of decisions, I can't begin to guess from the outside of what is causing what to happen there. I do know that when there is clear body camera footage, that provides a lot of, it just puts you at a different starting point in terms of the transparency, the certainty, and the clarity of knowing which names are even involved and how to address that and have the proper accountability and consequences.
Can you imagine a circumstance where you wouldn't tell the people of Boston who shot and killed a resident of Boston, a police officer, for 27 days?
If we knew who that was, no, absolutely not. But that might be, again, I don't want to speculate, but it's difficult, and I believe it has served Boston, our residents and our officers very well to have body-worn cameras, and would encourage other jurisdictions also to provide that level of transparency for residents.
Mayor Wu, we've been talking a lot about the police today, the Tyree Nichols case, the Faisal case in Cambridge. There's problems. We were talking with the governor about this, problems with the investigations up in Springfield and Worcester. And, we've talked a lot, obviously, about the Boston police in terms of people that had been disciplined or even fired by previous commissioners getting back on the job, people who had been accused of domestic violence or of taking money and stuff. I know you're in negotiations right now with the Boston Police Union. What's happening, and what would you like to see changed?
Yeah, I think we're still working through what the next steps in the process are. The city has been very clear with the involvement and kind of a difference in the process this year of really taking this out to the public and having some stakeholder meetings, having public conversations where our labor negotiators and those involved have been answering questions on in a public forum and making sure residents know why something that feels as esoteric as a legal document with very technical terms, that actually is it actually contains many of the ways in which the operations of the department and accountability or lack thereof can work. And so we remain committed to a contract that will take care of the health and well-being of our officers, address some of the issues that they've been facing on that front, as well as ensure accountability for the residents and the constituents that we serve. And I've heard very positive feedback from many groupings in conversations we have with officers and with the department themselves about they know in Boston we'd rely on the trust of residents to do our jobs well. That is where public safety comes from, and we need to earn that trust. Everybody recognizes that, and that means that when there are those who should not be on the job, we all acknowledge that this is a very, very important and consequential role, and it's not for everyone. And when there are those who should not be serving, it is in everyone's best interest, including our officers, for there to be a swift resolution and recognition of that.
And that's one of the things you're focusing on, as I understand it, changes to the disciplinary process for officers. Because right now, I believe they all go to arbitration. And
yeah,
often
it can
the
drag
city-
on years and years. So discipline and overtime are two of our bigger buckets that we're hoping for changes in. The amount of public resources that goes to paying for overtime, which is really driven by a couple factors, including the current medical leave policies. About 10% of our patrol force, when we first started this conversation, have been out on extended medical leave for over a year at this point, which means others are filling their roles, usually on overtime, and being
10%?
forced mandatorily to do those.
Is
Yes.
one of those
10
10% the guy who was at the January 6th demonstration who still hasn't been disciplined, has he? Or his case resolved, or has it?
That has been in a process.
In a process. We got to take a break.
Yeah, we're talking with Boston Mayor Michelle Wu. She's going to be with us until 2:30 today. She's very kindly agreed to stay an extra half hour to take our questions and yours. If you want to get in touch with the mayor, we'll try to get you as many as we can. The number's 877-301-8970. You're listening to. We also have a homie mic out there too that we can get to in a minute too at the Boston Public Library. We are broadcasting from the Boston Public Library.
And also, I'm supposed to say, you were listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Braude and Margery Eagan. It is 2:04, and yes, we are still live on the radio with the mayor of the city of Boston. Kindly enough, agreed to extend her stay till 2:30. Her monthly visit. She'll be with us for the next 25 minutes. Can I ask you a thing before we get back to the calls? You spoke at the dedication of the Embrace, and I know that Margery and I know I can speak for her, think it's one of the most beautiful, powerful statements that one could possibly make. You obviously know about the controversy that is.
I went to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, I think it was the next week. And I told everyone off there. This is our monument. We're proud of it. We love it.
Has it given you any second thoughts, the criticism?
No. That is the point of good art. It is drawing people into the conversation, makes you think. And it's also from the get-go, this monument was about much more than the physical structure that would be there. It is a whole community effort. It is tied to education efforts, ongoing resources and organizing around racial justice. And so it's a symbol, and I think it's beautiful and has the names of all of the local
great.
trailblazers. But
Have you been there at night yet?
no.
It is
Oh, no,
gorgeous.
that's not true. We did hold the vigil.
Oh, of course,
there.
that's
Yep.
right, with the underlighting. It's incredible.
Yep.
We have somebody else who has a question from the audience here. Is that correct? Robert, are you Robert?
Yes.
Hello, Robert. Welcome to the show. You're on with Mayor Wu.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Mayor.
Hi.
My question is about the city streets, the roads, the conditions, and I have kind of a multi-part question, I guess. The roads just seem to be getting worse and worse.
You mean
know,
potholes?
Potholes. Construction is done and patched up terribly, and that's a lot of it too. Is there any sort of plan to fix the streets? And I'm someone that drives a car as well as a bike, and I know you're putting in bike lanes and working on that. but the roads are still, it's dangerous. It's dangerous for me as a person on a bike, as well as just driving around, the wear and tear of my car and the conditions, people trying to swerve to avoid potholes and problems. And then is there accountability of, if there is construction done and they patch up a hole, it seems like a terrible job is done. And also, I'm a South End resident on Tremont Street, and that project seems to be going on and on and on, and it seems to be a terrible job being done with that. And I don't know what kind of accountability is for that whole project in the South End.
Thank
Okay.
you for the question.
Thank you so much. And I will follow up to get you, if you give your email to someone from our team, I'll make sure you get a direct update on where the South End project is going and timelines and all that. Let me start with, because I spend a lot of time obsessing about potholes personally, and have, forced our public works team to let me accompany them and understand the science of how it happens and what you have to do to tamp down the asphalt and what their routines are. And so this is, in fact, what I love most about the job of city government. So one thing that I have learned over the course of this, because I hear you, when you drive around, it does seem like, we're constantly fixing potholes. The response time for 311 when a pothole is reported is better than ever before, but it's still, when you look around, it still feels like they're everywhere. And I have learned that, in fact, this new kind of shifting weather, temperature really, situation that we're in is wreaking havoc on the roads. The worst thing for potholes to form is when the temperature dips below freezing and then comes back up again, because then you get the water in, freezes to ice and expands, and then loosens up as water again and gets rattled around. And so when before it used to be kind of warm, colder, freezing, warmer, and a kind of solid pattern. And now there's a lot of fluctuation in the temperatures, which we do our best to anticipate and find solutions for. And so that's not an excuse, but one thing that I learned that I found really interesting in terms of a little bit of an explanation of why we're seeing something a little bit different. The construction situation also, there have actually been changes to federal law recently. The telecom companies lobbied, and there were some provisions changed where the reimbursement that municipalities get when roads need to be dug up to install different things, and whether it's Wi-Fi or this or that, we used to have much more direct mitigation for us to patch up the roads properly and this and that. And the company largely is responsible for it now, but there's been a shift there that we are still trying to process the results from. And so there's some pieces that are moving around. We have a lot of people thinking about how to accelerate and speed up and be more responsive everywhere than we can. I will, it might not sound like comfort right now, but when you do see a pothole, we are very good, and I'm so proud of the team and how quickly they get out there. That does go directly into the queue and the service requests of how our public works team handles things. So they will be out filling one pothole, and if something pops up that's nearby them, you could see them, changing their route to go right to it. And so that also gives us data on where we need to think about road conditions. The roads are on a resurfacing plan that is, factors in equity and timing, and we want to keep roads, if you maintain them a little bit, they last a lot longer than if you let something crumble, and then it's way more expensive to fix it. So there's a rotating schedule, but we do really try to factor in the direct requests that come in.
Thank you very much for your question. We appreciate it. You mentioned Lego before. The headquarters moving from Enfield. Is it Enfield? Where is it? Enfield in Connecticut to Boston, 700 workers. A couple of things I found really interesting. One, I loved that your economic development guy was honest enough to say, we didn't have that much to do with this. The city itself attracted, and the talent. You're smiling. I hope that's an accurate reflection of what he said. It was.
I said we should just frame it as we got the deal done in one day.
That's what, okay, fine. But there are a couple of things here.
And a lot of work went into creating the atmosphere from all different sectors for that. But it was a very pleasant and exciting development.
Well, I'm hoping there's a huge moral to the story. I'm not one who believes in these bidding wars where you give $1 billion to get Amazon to come. No subsidies, from what I understand.
That's
no
correct.
tax incentives. Coming to a city where there have been a lot of transportation problems, as you talk about, their housing affordability issues, yet they decided this is the place they wanted to be, which I think is huge, actually. So is there a moral to this story, or is Lego an aberrational one and done kind of thing? Do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Companies now, more than ever, are tied to where their employees want to live. And the types of experiences in their non-work hours that they need to have. This access to support structures like childcare, or being in a city whose stated mission is to be the greenest city in America and the most family-friendly city in America. I think for us, that Lego in some ways is the perfect encapsulation of that. It's about science and engineering and connecting every generation into the idea of creating new possibilities. They have strong partnerships with many of our research institutions in the area, and particularly with MIT, and we look to help enhance that and tie the Boston Public Schools into that too.
So if this was close to a done deal and you got a call from the United States CEO of this, it's a Danish company, right? Yeah, a Danish company, and said, all we need, Mayor Wu, is a small tax break. We need a small bump down on our tax liability to the city for the first few years. Would you have entertained such a notion, or is your attitude no deals like that for people?
There are lots of places where we are trying to think about the long-term pieces of everyone's lives that need to fit together. I won't say that it's never worth it to ensure that we're bringing some benefit to our residents. There's often a need for accountability tied to those benefits, whether it's clawback structures or a real conversation about what the additional pieces are for our residents and the infrastructure that's needed. But in some ways, the best thing that we can do to attract economic development and business and jobs is to tackle our housing crisis, our transportation system, our school system, and ensure that we can be a community that's planning for the long term.
By the way, the governor also told us she supports your move to have a Boston seat on the T board. I assume you knew that, but I wasn't aware of it till today. What kind of reception are you getting on that from the legislature?
We came so close. Everyone's in support of the idea. We had votes affirming this from the House, the Senate, and even a signature from the former governor. It just got caught up in a little bit of finishing the language at the end, and so we're hoping that this session will make it
Kate,
through.
you're in Cambridge. You're on Boston Public Radio with the mayor of Boston. Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Is this Kate?
No, you're Kate. I'm not
Hi.
Kate. I'm Jim. Go ahead.
Mayor Wu, I'm wondering if, when you talked about housing for homeless, you've talked about empty lots and things like that, and I'm wondering if you have thought about halfway houses and also giving money to residents who, you know how you give money to developers, giving money to residents who would want to turn their houses into a boarding house and be able to live the rest of their life in the house with, someone who is making the meals and doing some of the boarding. In addition to that, they've had stuff in California where they've had multi-use, like where it was a hotel, so lower for people coming in to visit, and also they have a room, they take the sink and put it into like a kitchen sink so that they can wash their hands for the bathroom, and also it can be kitchen use, and then they have a microwave in there, and you could have a kettle and things like that, so they could have some meal in the room if they wanted to, with a little bistro table. Because it seems to me to take somebody homeless and put them in a situation where they have to start paying all these bills, making their meals and all this other stuff, and they're used to having a very small space. It makes more sense to me to have boarding houses and the idea of a halfway house.
Kate, thank you for the call.
And I'm wondering if you've thought about doing that, and also helping older residents who, especially with the census, people who
We
are
got it.
Kate, we got a
Kate.
lot of calls, so let's let the mayor get in here, please.
How about
Thank
it, Mayor
you very
Wu?
much.
Thank you, Kate, clearly you've put a lot of thought into the possibilities, and we are trying to take a similarly creative and let's think about every possible option approach to this. Often when we are working with providers who are serving residents who are unhoused, we see there's multiple needs all at once that have to be met and supported. Last night, starting right around midnight, was our annual census of unhoused residents, and so several dozen city workers, local providers, volunteers fanned out across the city to not only count how many residents were sleeping on the streets, but to engage in conversation and understand what their life path had been so far, what could be helpful, did they know about the services that were available, could we provide any immediate and long-term services. I had several conversations myself, and many people who I spoke to had been living on the streets for 6 years, 12 years. I met someone who was a chef working at a restaurant when the pandemic shut down and then lost his income and his housing.
Oh.
I met someone who was an iron worker and then had a personal tragedy, and the grief and loss of losing family members spiraled into substance use and lost income and lost housing. Housing is the foundation of being able to build back all of those other pieces of your life. And people said to me last night, we just need a little push, just a little push, a little wind beneath our wings, and we are ready, hungry to do this and work and get back at it. And people have been seeking treatment and services and healthcare. So our model that we've been showing in Boston, where we really focus on supportive housing, makes a big, big difference. And we need more of that housing. So love to talk more. I think some of our service providers might be the best partners to explore your idea with. But we have been thinking about in all sorts of other kinds of housing. You know, we need more senior housing in general. We need more housing for families. Could there be multi-generational arrangements that were explored? Everything has to be in the discussion.
Kate, thank you for your call. We appreciate it.
You know, Mayor Wu, there was a piece in the Globe the other day talking about busing does not improve academic outcomes for Boston kids of color. I didn't realize until I read the story it costs $140 million
Yes.
a year to bus kids around Boston. Not everybody agrees. The study was done by the MIT's Blueprint Labs, but that's a lot of money to save. On the other hand, I know neighborhood schools are controversial because there are some neighborhood schools that are better than others. So what do you make of this?
Okay, a couple things, and I feel like I keep going down rabbit holes, but this is really important. I've been thinking about this a lot, and it's I want to just give some context. So first, that is a huge chunk of the budget. It is definitely one of our largest places where resources are going. If we were to wave a magic wand and switch to neighborhood schools, in fact, that budget item would not go away. When you break down that $140 million, a significant chunk is transportation that is mandated by law for students with disabilities, students who need including those who need a bus monitor on board to monitor medical conditions as they're getting to and from school. There's a requirement from what's called door-to-door service in that way as well. When you think about kind of yellow bus service in general, some folks might have an idea that you meet at a certain point, neighborhood kids walk to a certain point, get on the bus, and get dropped off at the school. Door-to-door service is quite intensive because it often involves making sure students with mobility devices are secured properly. They are picked up from their homes in front of their own houses, and again, monitored and cared for the entire way. We are also providing transportation for other non-public school
Charters.
schools as well,
Yeah.
charter schools, parochial schools, who all have different start times that Boston Public Schools has not controlled. And so where our buses are sent, a significant part of that is outside of our control. One other last wrinkle in this is that the way that we have been structuring what's called special education or education for students with disabilities has in fact contributed to this and the poor outcomes, the disparate treatment and outcomes for students with disabilities, because many of the ways that we have been providing services have been school by school, a particular strand to serve a particular kind of need, whether it is autism or dyslexia, might be at a particular school. And therefore, those students have to be bused sometimes a long way to get to that school, rather than a commitment that every school must be available for every student and every school must be high quality for every student. That is a major change that we came to an agreement with in the teacher's contract this year, to completely reform how special education is structured, to put the funding and resources behind that. So we're in the process of reworking all of that right now, and that will be truly transformational, not only for the bus budget, but for families' choices and the experience and inclusion of students with disabilities.
Mayor Wu, and maybe it was in there, but if it was, my apologies. The underlying conclusion, beyond the fact that $140 million would not be saved, as you made pretty clear here. The underlying conclusion that busing did not improve academic performance in that. And as Margery said, there have been people on both sides. The people did the study and some have criticized it. Where do you fall in terms of the conclusions of the report?
Of whether we should
Of
take apart our bus
whether or
system?
not whether their conclusion that busing did not improve academic performance. Do you buy that?
I mean, we need to make sure that, okay, let me back up and say, whatever the statistics say, I know the real life experience of families who are making decisions about where to send their kids are such that there's an understanding that certain schools are the ones that you should try to get into for your child. And sometimes the data backs that up. Sometimes the fundraising that each school is able to do backs that up as well. There are deep disparities across the district to this day. But our approach is that, one, untangling some of the factors that have led to these disparities, such as how we resource special education and supports for English language learners, as well as how our facilities are structured, because some folks say, it's not about the quality of the building, it's about the learning that happens inside. It is intimately connected. There's no other city in the country with the scale and density of resources to serve young people, from our academic and cultural partners to the business community ready to help. We haven't been able to plug everyone in because we haven't necessarily seen school buildings as the hub for an entire community's connection point. That's what we're doing through our facilities plan as well.
Want to take a call? I'm sorry, yes.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things that's so great about neighbor schools, obviously, is that especially if you're a single mom or, you have a little community around your school, and I think that's one of the sad things that's missing in Boston. You can't have the woman next door watch your kids if you got to stay late at work or something.
Yeah, in some way we see this play out, right? East Boston High School has been a remarkable story of test scores going up during the pandemic while there's been a tremendous struggle to work through, of attendance going up, enrollment going up, and some of that is their geography, that because it is a community that it's harder to get through the tunnel, especially these days, that naturally much of their local community feels it's very connected, is invested, and we want to feel that everywhere. Our plan for high schools is going to require every high school having something special to offer. And so in some ways, we want to be able to balance students having their full choice of that, but also creating the community and that sense of predictability of knowing where your child will end up.
We only have a few more minutes left. The mayor is kind enough to agree to stay till 2:30. Michaela in Whitensville, you are on Boston Public Radio. Hi, Michaela.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Thank you.
What's up?
Hi, Mayor Wu.
Hello.
Hi. So I have a question on behalf of a big community of about 100 plus small business owners that sell on Copley Square during the spring, summer, and fall. So the rumor is that Copley Square is going to get a bit of a makeover, and we won't be allowed to have our markets there this season. I was just wondering, is that true? And if it is true, would you be willing to work with us to find another place to sell?
Thanks for calling, Michaela. I actually don't know if that's true or not. I don't know the exact timing of when potential infrastructure changes or the kind of renovations of the square might start. So I will find out that answer. But regardless of when it is, would love to make sure you all are connected to, if not Copley, because it's impossible, a location that we can continue benefiting from all of your services and support you all.
Mayor Wu, on a totally unrelated topic, I've said this on the air a couple of times. Every time a woman breaks a barrier like you did in your election, based on history, and then Maura Healey and Andrea Campbell and on down the list, we've talked about each of them. But the moment it really struck me, I don't know if you have, I'm sure you have moments like this in your life where you dig into something and you don't have time to step back. When we were at the Embrace the other day and we were talking to you, Margery's at one end, I'm at the other, we're talking to you, and all of a sudden Andrea Campbell showed up, and she showed up with Mayor Healey, and there's Mayor Wu, who made history, there's Maura Healey, who made history, there's Andrea Campbell, who made history, and the list, we could add another dozen, with 5 of the 6 constitutional officers being women. What is that? What do you feel about that? And how do you think that'll change the way our lives are. How do you think that'll change Massachusetts and our city and all that sort of thing? It's not just you anymore. It's a whole plethora of people.
It kind of hit me when I was in the House chamber during the governor swearing in. One, I was kind of sitting on the side next to all the Gold Star families and able to, not be facing this, but kind of sitting on the side, so I was able to see the room and to just look around and witness the excitement. It really felt like this is a moment in history that I'm going to tell my kids about, my grandkids about one day. I was here when this happened, and I've had the chance to, for better or worse, right? It's all happening in recent years. It could have happened a long, long time ago. It should have happened a long, long time ago, but Congresswoman Presley's election nights, and we've been so ready for this moment for a long time. I think sometimes I'll speak with people who used to live in Boston or kind of came through Boston for school many years ago, and they're shocked, right, when they see me. And then I get the chance to tell them about how this is really representative of every level of government now. Of course, we have a lot more work to do, as always, but our cabinet in City Hall, our leadership in community, and I feel very blessed that at a time when the country is having such intense, difficult conversations, the hardest conversations for us are how do we get it together here so that we can go as fast and far as we can. It's not often more often than not a question of what should we do, but how do we get it done now, and how do we make sure as many people as possible are included in that.
One last question. How was Sally Ting's donut?
Oh, it was great.
It was. It's Susan, by the way.
Oh, it's Susan.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Susan, oh, I'm so sorry.
Susan is still here.
Susan
and
is here? Oh, Susan.
She told me that they're healthy.
Hi there.
So that's the best part.
Fabulous. You have 3 votes right here. Susan, my apologies. Thank you so much.
And
Mayor,
where are they from? In Needham?
Susan Ting in Needham, and I assume we Google you and something? We can't hear. Tomorrow we'll say hi.
She says they're baked, not fried.
Oh, Everyday
Not
Bake Shop. I'm sorry.
Everyday Bake Shop.
Everydaybakeshop.com.
Jim,
Thank you very
we're out of
much,
time here,
Tim.
so we gotta move
We don't
on.
have a precise number. I
Okay.
asked. Thank you, Mayor Wu.
Yeah, thank
we
you
really
very,
appreciate
very
it.
much.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
And if I may be sexist, you look spectacular at State of the City. That really hit me, a woman in a beautiful dress coming out to address everybody.